This video contains spoilers for Loki Season 1, Episode 2, as well as potential spoilers for future episodes if our theories become a little too accurate. Now, this episode, we get revealed who the variant from the last episode is. And congratulations to us, we were right about her being Lady Loki. Or is she Lady Loki? In this episode, we're going to focus on this Lady Loki character and decipher whether she really is Lady Loki or another character in disguise. So please strap in and welcome back to another episode of So we're going to jump straight into Lady Loki for this episode. So while, when she first showed up, I was like, wait, Lady Loki. The more I think about the episode, the more evidence I collect, the more I doubt my previous conception of her as Lady Loki. I actually think she might be some other character in disguise. But I first wanted to hear some of Olivia and Professor Carnes' opinions about who exactly this Lady Loki is.
First off, to be honest, when she took off her hood, I was taken aback and I went Amora because I was like, that looks like the Enchantress. And I know if it is the Enchantress, it's likely not Amora because it's too complicated. It'd probably be a different version like Sylvie. But I'm kind of thinking it's not Lady Loki.
I had a similar reaction where I thought the sort of blonde looking hair skewed more Enchantress. But the Loki horn headband did kind of signal that that's what they're going for. So I'm going to come down. I think at this stage, I'm convinced that is meant to be a female variant of the Lokis we already know. So that would be my kind of interpretation at this stage.
I think several evidences that I would like to throw out that made me a little suspicious about her identity was, first, Olivia said the hair color. I think it's absolutely possible there are Loki variants who look drastically different from him, but the episode's evidence doesn't really seem to support that, because there was one scene where Mobius was showing all the different Loki variants that they know, and all of them look either identical or very, very similar to Tom Hiddleston, and none of them had blonde hair. And Lady Loki, Sofia DiMartino, to be honest, doesn't really look like Tom Hiddleston. And the way that she acts during the episode is also kind of not similar to Loki, which makes me think this is slightly different. Either a Loki that has abandoned or really, really disliked her identity as a Loki, or she's a completely different character in disguise. So I looked up some internet evidence, because the internet is always right on fan theories, so accurate on everything. But anyway, so the internet actually found that in the foreign credits, so after the main credits show, that says Sofia DiMartino's character's name is Sylvie. Now in the comics, there's a character called Sylvie Lushton, and she is actually another version of Enchantress, so outside of the Amora Enchantress that we know of. And I did a little bit of research in this character, and this is what I have to report. This is based on Marvel Comics Wiki. So Sylvie Lushton was actually just this ordinary girl, but Loki actually gave her magical powers, making her think that she's actually Asgardian. And she later on took on the mantle of the Enchantress, dressing up just like Amora and having a lot of similar powers as her. So she actually suspects that she's one of the Asgardians. So she kind of forgot about who she actually is. She thinks she's actually an Asgardian. And Loki actually says, I like the idea of creating a mortal who suspects she's one of my kind. I think Marvel Studios can do a little twist on the Sylvie character that says, instead of believing that she's an Asgardian, maybe she can just be a person who Loki gave his powers to, and she actually believed that she was a Loki until she maybe came to despise that identity. And one of the powers that Sylvie has in comics is mental manipulation. So plant mental suggestions and alter all the others' minds to meet her will and desires, quoted from Marvel Wiki. And one of the things that we see this character do in the series is actually controlling other people in some kind of mental manipulation. Now, we know that Loki probably can't do that in the movies, because why would he need the Mind Stone and the Scepter from the first Avengers movie if he could just literally control people's mind by himself? And also, when she first showed up with the hood, she had these green energy on her hands. I don't think Loki has that kind of power just by himself with energy projection, or at least we haven't seen that yet, which makes me believe that Sylvie is actually a very plausible choice for who this person is. So I think it might be Sylvie Lushton, but I also think it might just be another version of Lady Loki, and we're overthinking this entire thing.
No, it makes sense to me. It reminds me of our discussions about the possibility that Agatha Harkness was going to show up, and I think it has a similar property where it seemed kind of like the pieces were fitting together, but we wanted to also resist that because it seemed a little too straightforward, and we spun out more elaborate theories. And I kind of feel like, Harry, that's all really persuasive. It also lines up with the one thing that this sort of antagonist says in the last episode that doesn't square with the female Loki variant hypothesis, which is she really reacts negatively to being called Loki. She doesn't want to be called that name. And, my understanding is Loki variants would all probably be called Loki or wouldn't be really put off by that name. But it makes sense if, she's an enchantress who was created by Loki. Maybe there's some bad blood between the two of them.
Why is she doing what she's doing? And where are these reset charges going?
I've been thinking about that because it isn't clear to me what damage a reset charge would do if you dropped it in the main timeline. So if you put it somewhere where, everything's, where there's not a branch, wouldn't a reset charge just make the timeline itself? So my working theory was that perhaps she was sending all these reset charges back to undo all the work of the TVA. So every time they show up to fix something, she's sending a reset charge right before that. So now they haven't fixed it and the whole thing will spiral out of control.
Yeah, I definitely don't have a clear picture either, but I sort of tried to focus on the function of the reset charges. Even though they're intended to reset things back to the original timeline, I think we were hypothesizing last time that they're essentially disintegrating like whatever branch exists. So I mean, if they're not set to sort of before they go off to determine whether there is a branch in the timeline, would they perhaps do damage to the actual timeline if you set them somewhere they weren't supposed to be?
I wanted to briefly, before because I want to delve deeper into that question, I want to kind of look at briefly where are some of the locations that she sent those charges to. Olivia sent me this amazing image literally right after I was pausing the episode to find out what the displays are. It was such a coincidence. And I'm going to put this screenshot up here right now. And some of the interesting locations and times that I've seen are first 2301 Vormir. We have 2004 Asgard, 1382 Ego, 1982 Titan, Hala, Xandar. And that's pretty much and some real world locations. These are some really interesting locations that she's putting these reset charges to, which I think it's pretty curious.
I mean, they're all really significant places in the fictional universe, that's for sure.
So one of the cities is New York, USA, which is September 21st, 1947, which is way before when the Sam Raimi and Andrew Garfield series took place. And I was wondering if this is what sets off those universes. Like, what if those universes are just what's been created with the multiverse? If this actually creates a branch reality, then it will be before those universes take place. So maybe something happens in this series that there's irreversible damage to the sacred timeline, and that ends up creating the Sam Raimi universe and the Andrew Garfield universe.
I think that's a plausible theory, partially because I'm still having trouble buying into the whole sacred timeline thing.
I'm starting to think that it may have something to do with Lady Loki. I think Lady Loki is an imminent threat to the TVA and its order. And I think the reason is that she might have discovered some secret that the TVA doesn't want her to discover. And I would like to theorize that truth is that the timekeepers don't actually exist. I think we're going to find out, just like the Mandarin from Iron Man 3, I think the timekeepers are fictitious creations created by someone who's eager to portray himself as a god in order to control the timelines using technology. And I think that person is none other than Kang the Conqueror. I just think as the episode progresses further, it's more and more likely that Kang is probably pulling the strings. And one of the things that I know this is super, I don't think this is going to be an intentional MCU reference that they're going to do. But when Ivan Vanko says something in Iron Man 2, if you can make God bleed, people will cease to believe in him. And I think one of the things that Kang is probably afraid of is that if people expose that he's just a person rather than these gods that can really manipulate time, he will lose some of his authority over the timeline. And I think he's desperately trying to stop that from happening. And Lady Loki, in this sense, acts as a whistleblower to overtake the TVA, because it makes sense, because Loki says he wants to take over the TVA as his new ruler. Lady Loki says, I don't want to rule the TVA with you. I think it's pretty obvious she wants to overthrow it. And it makes sense that she might be some kind of whistleblower who's trying to destroy the TVA.
Yeah, I've been saying since episode 1 that I think bad Loki, superior Loki is an insurgent trying to stop the TVA, and that Kang is responsible for whatever's bad about the TVA. So, Harry, I'm with you 100% on this collection of theories.
Yep, so am I. I think, I definitely think Marvel's going out of their way to sort of frame the people who work in the TVA as trapped. Because we have Mobius and Loki having this whole conversation about, Mobius is like, I like jet skis. And Loki's like, have you ever been on a jet ski? He's like, no, I just like them. And then he does his whole speech about belief in the TVA. The end of it does sound a little culty.
We meet in peace at the end of time.
It's interesting that Mobius thinks that is the ultimate goal, like that one day the timekeepers will accomplish so much that there will simply be order, like sort of implying that the branching off is not a natural part of how time should work, and that it's natural that the timekeepers should order it to the extent where like nothing else would exist.
And I really like that we keep coming back to the question of predetermination, giving a sort of philosophical sort of angle on what's going on in the show. Because if there is one timeline, and if Loki's got a tape showing his, non-variant entire life, did he have any free will? And so I suspect that tension will be pulled out. I suspect that in the end, Loki will, maybe this can be one of the predictions I lock in, that what's the value of mischief? Well, mischief and chaos are what give us all, sort of make life, some big riff on variety is the spice of life, basically. That we'll get in this series, that's how Loki will sort of come to terms with like being the god of mischief, and that not being a bad thing.
Yeah, so I think that's a lot of theories for one character and a very, very deep discussion. But what are some of the theories that we want to lock in for this episode, officially lock in?
I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna lock in that this variant Loki is Sylvie Lushton. I'm pretty confident. I'll also lock in that I don't think she's a major antagonist. I think she's a good guy.
I'll lock in that, my one prediction is this final conflict is going to come down to order versus chaos. And that, along the lines of what Olivia and I have been discussing, that Loki is going to, sort of learn or come to realize that his mischief is really a virtue, that, chaos is somehow going to be equated with choice or free will. And so I'll lock in kind of that prediction, just as Thor kind of got his head around what being the god of thunder means in Ragnarok, I think Loki will, come to appreciate what being the god of mischief really means. We start out, come to think of it, with Mobius saying, none of these things you do are actually very mischievous, and almost hinting at, Loki doesn't really even understand what he is. So I think that'll be the specific prediction I lock in, that Loki will finally understand what it means to be the god of mischief.
I'm going to endorse both Olivia's theory about Sylvie and Professor Carnes' theory about chaos versus order. I want to add on Professor Carnes' theory a little bit, say we will get a deeper discussion about free will versus determinism. More specifically, I think we're going to see Loki taking a more active role into the sequence of events that's going to happen in the remaining 4 episodes after he leaves the TVA. So like a little poetic mirroring that they have with the TVA's passive acceptance of fate and challenging your fate outside of the TVA. I'm going to lock that in. I'm also going to lock in that I think I'm going to go further with my Kang theory from last one. I'm going to say that the timekeepers don't exist. Either don't exist or have existed but have died. And I'm going to lock in the theory that Kang is behind the TVA. And another theory that I want to lock in is that whole theory about Sylvie's endgame, about liberating timelines rather than destroying or disrupting them. So more different theories will be coming. If I Was Kevin Feige Part 2 will be coming out very, very soon. And just a little teaser, we will be doing a Kevin Feige episode on Black Widow as well. So keep an eye out for that. And don't forget to get your tickets for Black Widow. So you can support our channel by liking and subscribing and also sharing this video. And it would be really helpful if you can comment down some of your theories down below about who do you think this variant Lady Loki is. That's all for today. We'll see you next week in another episode of Different Theories.